Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Welcome to this episode of the Selling to Corporate podcast. I am excited because by the time you're listening to this, I will be back from having climbed Mount Toubkal in Morocco. I'm terrified. As somebody who doesn't like heights and who wouldn't describe themselves as, I don't know, an avid hiker / trekker, this is quite a big deal really for me, and I'm not sure how it's going to pan out, but fingers crossed that by the time you listen to this episode I am back safe and sound and have made it up and down the mountain successfully. I feel like down is possibly the more important part. I have things to do. I need to get back. Please do keep an eye if we are connected on LinkedIn. Side note, obviously, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, go and connect with me. Keep an eye on LinkedIn because I'm sure that as soon as I'm back, I will be telling everybody my life lessons from it, which probably will involve not climbing mountains for me. But who knows? I could find a new love. August is a really exciting month, and there have been a few changes over at Selling to Corporate HQ that I just wanted to let you know about before we dive into today's episode, which is an important episode. It's definitely going to hopefully challenge some of the fears that you guys face and give you different perspectives on whether or not big companies actually are going to prioritize working with small providers over the next couple of years. Obviously, I'm climbing a mountain. That's a relatively big shift. Interesting. Still can't believe it's happening. I will see how I feel afterwards. But there are bigger updates over here at the HQ, and those bigger updates have come in the form of two particular areas that I'm really excited about. So one of them, obviously, is that we have finally launched the new website. Yes! You can't see it, but I am waving my coffee in glee. New websites take forever. I hate them. I haven't redone my website in years. If you're listening to this and thinking, oh God, Jess has revamped her website, maybe I should do that. Don't. Like, honestly, haven't finished the corporate side of our website yet. Probably won't until, I don't know, October. It is not necessary for your B2B clients to have an all singing, all dancing, exciting website. I might, if people are interested, do an episode separately on B2B websites and how to know if and when you want to get one. But honestly, none of my corporate clients have ever even looked at my website. So really don't worry about it. It is not the thing that you must focus on. And we've talked, I know, in previous episodes about the fact that if they're asking you to just send over your website or just send over a one sheet, that what they're actually trying to do is be like, I'm busy, go away, as opposed to wanting to see those things and avidly studying them. Okay. Excitingly for me, we have launched officially the new website. So please do go and check it out. It's over at selltocorporate.com, which is amazing. It looks very snazzy. Big shout out to my incredible designer and web developers, Annabelle Santos and Louise Maggs, who've been amazing throughout the process. So you can go and check that out. It's officially live. You can see it's got all new branding. It's got lots of nice testimonials on there. If you like what you see, please do let me know, because it would be really nice for me to know that it's hitting the mark. So please do go and have a look. On another exciting note, we are making some really, really cool changes for 2024, or starting in 2024, for the C-suite, which means that if you decide to join before September the 1st, not only will you be getting access to the current pricing, because that will be changing on September the 1st, but also you will be grandfathered into every single update that we make to the C-suite, and that will be changing as of 2024. So if you want to get in at the current pricing, and with all of the exciting changes that are coming up, please make sure you grab your spot before September 1st. I know I've gone on about it, but I get a bunch of emails every time from people who are like, I really meant to sign up, but I just forgot. And unfortunately, I cannot hold that kind of deadline any longer. So please, if you want to join, make sure that you grab your spot before September 1st. You'll get access to all of the exciting new updates that are coming, both for the hot seats this year and for things that are happening in 2024. And if you do decide to pay in full as well, you also get a complimentary one-to-one with me. So there are lots and lots of things that are exciting about that. Let's dig into today's episode. I'm going to be drinking my mushroom coffee as we go because I need the pep, quite frankly, today. And if you haven't tried mushroom coffee yet, well, it doesn't taste altogether like normal coffee, but it's very, very good for those of us who've got racing brains. Now, this episode has kind of come about in an interesting way because recently I've seen lots of posts on Facebook, which is always interesting because let's face it, I don't spend a ton of time on Facebook, but I've seen lots of posts on Facebook and I've seen posts on LinkedIn. And I will be clear, nobody has emailed in and asked me about this. I always think it's a bit weird when people are like, yeah, I've had like loads of emails about something and you're thinking, really? Like loads of emails about that topic? To be clear, nobody's emailed me about this, but I have seen lots of posts about it on Facebook and on LinkedIn where people are talking about big companies and whether or not they buy from small providers. And then kind of off the back of that, I've seen lots of discussions around the ways that people think they should be targeting big companies. And there seem to be a few schools of thought. One of the most popular schools of thought is, well, big companies just don't buy from small suppliers. They don't want to buy from small business owners. They'd rather buy from the big consultancies. And I want to talk about that today. I think that's very important. The other school of thought is that there needs to be some kind of difference between the way that we approach or do lead generation with big companies and the way that we sell to big companies. For me, that's a really interesting conversation. I obviously have some short answers on it, which we'll go throughout the episode, no doubt. But it's an interesting conversation for me because I think it talks a lot about the way that we track our businesses and the way that we measure success in our businesses and our sometimes aversion to tracking our metrics. Because when we talk about big businesses and we start having these conversations or we surround ourselves in a vacuum with these conversations like big companies don't buy from small providers, or you have to do lead generation in a very specific way to target big companies versus smaller companies, or you should only work with startups until a certain point, or you should only work with companies that have got a turnover of this or an employee number of that. And it's really indicative of people feeling quite insecure about the results that they're getting and trying to find a way outside of measuring their metrics to understand why they're not getting the results they want. I know that you're listening to this and thinking, well, that's pretty harsh. And I'm sorry, it is. It's a harsh reality, I think. I think one of the issues we have as small business owners or service providers is that we can get so caught up in wanting to deliver and doing a great job with delivery and not really knowing how sales processes work or lead generation processes work and what we're supposed to track and what we're supposed to see as identifying good traits and the things that we're supposed to see that are indicative that we're not going to get the results that we want. That we put a lot of stock into looking at things that we can't really prove, disprove, or control. Singularly, as individuals, you are working in relative isolation. You have no idea what anyone else is really doing. And let's face it, everyone on the internet says a lot of different things, and they say them to lots of different people, depending on what kind of result or reaction or perception that they want in the market about them, about their business. I think it's important to have more transparent conversations about it. One of the reasons that I wanted to record this episode is because about 80% of my clients are working with what I would term household name organizations. Obviously, we all know that the clients who buy the C-suite or products from me are people who are solopreneurs. They are service providers. They are coaches, consultants, keynote speakers generally, course providers, done-for-you service providers. And these are people who are just like you and just like me, who are working with, again, what I would term household name organizations. And what I mean by that is organizations that you hear of and you go like, oh yeah, I use their stuff, or oh yeah, I've been part of something that they've organized, or oh, I've seen them on the news. 80% of my clients are working with companies like Netflix, Sky, Philips, Facebook, Instagram, Meta as a whole, the NHS, central government departments, the Ministry of Defence. Like, they are working with some of the world's largest organizations, when they join my programs, they have exactly the same question. Will big companies buy from me? And if they will, how am I supposed to target them? Because let's face it, lots of us want to work with household brand name companies. We do. We want to work with them. They're interesting. They've got cool things going on. It's really a bit of an ego boost to have a big brand aligned with you, buying from you, excited about working with you. So lots of people do want to work with these larger organizations. But there is this common school of thought, like I say, where people are like, oh, but they just don't want to. They just don't want to work with small service providers, or they're just a lot harder to get hold of, or it's so much more difficult to do lead generation with bigger companies. Respectfully, and it is respectful because let's face it, there's no judgment here. That is wrong. And I say that as somebody, not as somebody who's like, look, a bunch of my clients are working with these companies, so must be simple. But as somebody who has done new business development for the entirety of their career, in multiple different industries, multiple different countries, multiple different cultures. And I can tell you that there is zero difference between how difficult it is to approach and target small companies versus approaching and targeting bigger companies. There is no difference. And I mean that in the way that we do it, in the way that the process works. What there is a difference in is people's own ability to run a successful proactive lead generation process. There's a very big difference in ability because most of the people that I work with have not worked in sales. So why would they know how to run an effective lead generation process? Well, of course they wouldn't. Why would you? It's not something that you have spent the entirety of your career doing. So we can't beat ourselves up about it, but we do have to acknowledge that we might need to change it. And that's why I wanted to run this episode just to give you a little bit of reassurance if you're thinking, oh, I can only work with smaller companies because bigger companies will never work with me, or I just don't really understand how I'm supposed to approach them, and what do I even say? Should it be different? And even some of the bigger questions around getting paid by bigger companies. Should we be charging them less? No. Like, oh, you're a big brand. That's nice. But like, my prices are still my prices. I want to dig into a few of these things today to give you that reassurance that you need, that if you want to start approaching bigger organizations, that you can, and B, give you some sensible ways to track and understand whether or not your efforts are working and what you need to do differently. Let's start by talking about organizations and them working with smaller providers, because I see this a lot and I hear this a lot. And this is something I genuinely do see in my emails, where people will ask me whether or not big companies really want to work with small providers, or whether they really will. And again, there will be people who tell you they won't, there'll be people who tell you they will, and those people will all have their own different experiences. So again, I'm going to come at this from not just my experience of setting up new business divisions in various industries across both the public sector and not-for-profit, things like charities, educational establishments, housing associations, local government, central government, NHS, and medical environments that are publicly funded, right through to things like retail, luxury fashion, financial services, pharmaceuticals, technology, sports, all of which I've also worked with, built specific divisions around, okay? And the experiences of my clients. Let's talk about this from a service provider perspective, because I think that there are lots of people who will avidly say that big companies don't want to work with small providers, and they make it purposefully difficult for small providers to work with big organizations. And I think that in some industries can be true. And the industries that I mean by that are anything that is central government organized, particularly in the UK. Happens in other countries as well, but generally anything to do with centralized government services will, after a while, require tendering, or will, after a certain amount or value of deal, will require a tender process. And that's because public money is held to account. The public has a right to know that people are making wise decisions about all of the taxes that we're paying, and that they're using them to fund decent services, not just spending them on really expensive, let's face it, consultants and things that aren't able to be justified. So that is one of the main reasons that people get on their high horse, if you like, about, well, big companies just don't want to buy from small providers because they all have PSLs, preferred supplier lists, or tendering processes that make it really hard. And that isn't the case for all of them. Like I say, central government services, absolutely. Yeah, you will come into contact with that much more commonly. Doesn't mean they don't buy from small service providers. In fact, the UK government has an initiative where they want to work with multiple service providers. The difference is you are going to, like I say, above a certain value of deal, or depending on what projects you're working on, you are going to have to go through a stringent capacity and supplier testing scenario where you are liable to write out what it is that you do, how you're qualified to do it, how much capacity you have to do the actual work or deliver the actual projects, to make sure that you're not going to be financially insolvent and therefore quit a project halfway through, and also that you can deliver what you say you can, right? And that's fair enough. It's public money. We should be accountable for that. That's not a problem. But the majority of large organisations actually don't require small providers to be on any kind of preferred supplier list or tender for business at all. They might get you to do it after you have gotten into a company. Let's say you've signed multiple deals and contracts. They might go, hey, look, why don't you come onto our preferred supplier list because we've got a high volume of work in this area and we would now start to want a discount for all this work we're giving you and paying you full whack for. But they're not doing that straight away. And in fact, I've talked about this on a lot of episodes. Most stakeholders will be able to have and sign off their own budgets for companies that they don't even have to quantify. Okay, so if you're thinking, oh God, I can't pitch to the big companies, or I can't work with the big companies because they just don't want small providers, they're going to make me go through massive PSL processes or tendering processes to do very basic bits of work, that is not the case. And if that's what you're hearing when you are pitching big companies, then you need to be thinking about how your sales process is working. Are you actually in control of your sales process? Are you actually working clearly with a decision maker who has the ability to sign off their own budget? And if you're not, that's why you might be running into more complex processes, okay? Or perhaps you've already done a volume of work with a company and now they're talking to you about working on a PSL because they want a preferred rate, because they're giving you a load of business. That's a commercially viable thing for them to do, absolutely, and to ask for. Does it mean you have to do it? No, but it's worth them asking, okay? Organisations actually, contrary to popular opinion, do like to work with smaller providers, and there are a few main reasons. One of them is that smaller providers can be much more agile and provide much more tailored services than bigger organizations. So if you've ever worked for a company, you will know that most companies have big change projects that run in areas like technology or systems or behavioral change, lots of different things. It used to be really, really popular about, 10, 15 years ago to have the big four consultancy firms come in and they would deliver it. And everyone hated the big four because they were like, oh God, they come in, they charge a load of money and they just give common sense answers. But somehow the company listens to them, and not employees that have been there for years that are saying exactly the same thing. I get it. We've all been there. But organizations now are looking for innovative thought. They're looking for ways to challenge perceptions, to deal with potentially new problems, new areas. And that means that they're not always looking for these big consultancies. Yes, they'll absolutely consider them. And yes, the big consultancies have relationships there. And yes, the big consultancies will continue to do business development and pitch companies just like you should be doing regularly. However, the big consultancies have massive constraints around what they can actually do and deliver, because ultimately the solutions that they provide are prescribed by the people who have created those said solutions in those organizations. There's very little room to step outside the lines. And so actually big organizations like working with small providers who can provide a much more tailored, much more agile set of solutions or services that actually meet their need. So they're paying for the things that are genuinely going to get them the results, as opposed to paying for things that they don't really want but just have to come as part of the process. Bigger organizations also like working with small service providers because they're actually paying for the expertise that you bring, not the fancy graduate training programs, the expensive branding for the company that you might work for, keeping the lights on in very expensive, centrally located offices. They're not paying for any of that when they work with a small provider. They're working directly with you. They're working directly with potentially your brain if you're providing consultancy, or they're working with your skills and expertise in other areas. For them, that means that they're much more likely to get better results. So think about the difference between what a big company is paying you for and what a big company is paying another large organization for. When they're paying you, they're getting the expertise, they're getting the tailored solutions, they're getting somebody who is responsive, who genuinely cares about the transformation. When they're working with a bigger organization, they're getting a lot of red tape and politics, internal processes, they're paying for the branding, they're paying for the training programs. They're probably not getting the same level of expertise as they get from you because they're likely getting a graduate who's been maybe doing the job a year, if they're lucky, to deliver significant transformation. So there are a lot of reasons that companies like small service providers. And it doesn't come down to, oh, we can beat them down on rates, because again, that's not true. It shouldn't be the case. If you are pricing and negotiating correctly, it won't be the case. There are lots of reasons that organizations like those small service providers, which brings us on to our next piece of today's conversation around, do they require different lead generation tactics? And I hate making wisecracks. You know that. It's it's not really my jam, but the answer simply is no, they don't. And I want to get into this because I think it's important that we understand that I'm not just saying no, they don't because it's easier for me in some way. Frankly, it's not. It's much harder for me to tell people, look, there is no difference in lead generation strategies or tactics that you should be using to work with big organizations versus working with smaller organizations. However, I know that it seems like it is. And that's perception in some ways can form reality. I know that it can be nerve-wracking to target bigger organizations. I know that there's a lot of mindset monkeys around, oh, am I good enough? What if they reject me? Is it because I'm too small? Is it because my pricing isn't right? Should I really approach them? Can I really work with them? I understand all of that. But when it comes to lead generation and effective lead generation, unfortunately, the answer is that it is no different targeting bigger companies than it is smaller companies. In some senses, it's actually easier because bigger organizations have job roles that are much more defined, which means that your stakeholder targeting can be much more accurate, means your messaging can be much more specific. Those things all help you to generate more qualified leads. Generating more qualified leads generally gives you more qualified sales calls, which gives you more ability to create solutions or suggest solutions that are much more likely to work, which translates into being able to write clearer, better, more specific proposals that, surprise, surprise, are much more likely to convert. Actually, selling to bigger organizations in some ways can be a lot easier because of the specificity, because of the fact that they've got so many defined job roles and stakeholders who are responsible for very specific things, because in most cases they will have bigger budgets than startup organizations, and because they'll be focused on areas that aren't only commercially critical, the things that we stereotypically think are easier to sell, sales, marketing, whatever, but also some of the things that we can tell ourselves often are not integral, that companies must think of as being nice to have or want to pay less for, things like nutrition, health and wellness services, mental health, stress reduction, etc. And actually, it's not the case. They're not nice to have. They are business critical objectives. They meet clear needs, but we don't always articulate them in that way. And that's something that's a whole different podcast episode in itself. So I'm not going to tug too hard at that piece of string today. But the simple answer is no, they don't require different lead generation techniques. However, we've already established that it can feel very different to sell to corporate organizations that are bigger. And also, a lot of us, like I mentioned earlier, don't come from sales. So don't know how an effective lead generation process works, or what to do to create an effective lead generation process, or how we should even measure the success of an effective lead generation process. And that's really where we should be focusing on. Not should we do entirely different things to try and make bigger companies buy from us, but instead, okay, is my existing lead generation process qualified? Have I been using it with smaller companies? Did it work there? Because if the answer is no, then it's not going to work with bigger companies. It's not because they're bigger, it's just because your lead generation process didn't work. Might be sort of thinking, well, that's nice, Jess, but like, how am I supposed to understand if my lead generation process works? And there is a very, very simple metric for this. The success of your lead generation is only determined by the amount of sales calls that you are booking. Okay. The only way that we determine the success of your lead generation strategy is whether or not you are booking enough sales calls. I say to my clients, you should be looking in multiples of 5 for this, because we know that we'll close 1 in 4, right? The average person, according to various statistics around the world for sales, will close 1 in 4 or 25% of sales opportunities with no sales training. Okay, so if your number is less than that, if your percentage is less than 25%, if you look at the last 10 or so opportunities that you've had and you have closed fewer than 2, then you have a problem. Essentially, if you are closing less than 25% of opportunities or less than 1 in 4, then your sales process is broken somewhere and you just need to troubleshoot where. But when we talk about lead generation and the success of it, we are literally talking about, are we booking enough sales calls? So if we're looking at this, I would say look at it in multiples of 5, because yes, we should be closing 25% on average, but some of you are newer to sales. Some of you are looking at troubleshooting a lead generation process in some way, and there might be reasons that it takes you more calls or fewer calls or whatever. So try and look at it in multiples of 5. Now, if you're not booking a decent amount of sales calls a month, so if you're booking less than 5 a month, well, you're not going to make any money. It would be very, very difficult, unless the rest of your sales process was absolutely perfect, for you to be closing regular sales. If you are running more than 5 sales calls, and by the way, I believe that everyone should be having much more than 5 sales calls a month, like just as a kind of standard thing. I know that we talk about it on the podcast sometimes, and people have asked me, how long does it take each week, or how many hours should I be spending each week on B2B sales activity if I join the C-suite? And I say, look, lots of people when they start out, if they are looking at building an end-to-end process, can do just their lead generation. They could focus on that for a month, and then the next month be solidly booked with sales calls. So the first month they might spend 2 hours a week just doing lead generation implementation. And the next month they might be like, oh God, I've booked so many sales calls that I'm now doing 4 hours a week just on sales calls, then having to build in time for lead generation and things like that. But there's no hard and fast rule. It's just that you should be booking in regular sales calls. The more sales calls you have, the more money you're likely to make. And caveat that with the more qualified sales calls you have, so the more sales calls you have with leads who are genuinely interested in your area of specialism, responsible for it, and have the budget responsibility, those are much better calls than I had a nice chat with somebody's assistant. They seem really good. They're going to pass me along. That's not a qualified sales call. Okay. Just isn't. It's not going to give you the result that you want. They don't have enough sway internally in the organization. It's really unfortunate because they might be a nice person, but it's not going to get you the result. What we need to be thinking about if we are approaching larger organizations is, does my existing lead generation strategy work? Do I have an actual process in place for it? Is there evidence that this worked before with small companies? We can fall into this dangerous cycle of, it's just because they're big organizations that they're not buying from me, or that they're not doing things. And actually that isn't the case. Sometimes it's just that we don't have a good lead generation process to start with. So we need to troubleshoot that. And if we don't have a lead generation process where we are making clear attempts each week to generate proactively leads that are qualified, that are going to be responsible for our specialism, have the budget responsibility for paying us, then actually, no, you're probably going to struggle whether you're selling to big or small organizations. The TLDR version, for those of you who are on Reddit in, I don't know, 2001, is you need to look at your lead generation process rather than it being, should I use different methods of lead generation because they're a bigger company? It should be, was my lead generation process working before? If it was ad hoc, if it was spray and pray, if it was, I'm posting a lot on LinkedIn, I'm hoping that they're seeing it and they'll contact me, and you're not really taking control of it, then no, it's going to be much more difficult. If your lead generation process before was proactive and targeted and strategic, and you have multiple follow-ups and you have a way that you are staying top of mind with people even after you've initially generated them as a lead, as it were, then you're much more likely to have success both with bigger and smaller organizations. And just as a final point on this, when we talk about lead generation methods, I say to everybody, I teach 8 inside the C-suite. The most popular by far always are the things that are most accessible. So cold email marketing, LinkedIn lead generation. They are the most accessible resources. They are the most popular for people to use. Do they work for big and small organizations? Yes, absolutely. Why? Is it because I get people to write really funny emails, or is it because I get them to spend ages creating lots of content? No. I'm inherently quite a boring person. When it comes to lead generation, I'm quite dull. I see it as a very much a data entry exercise. But it's because those strategies, are designed to help our learners and participants understand who they should be targeting, what kind of stakeholders, why, how to create the right messaging that is specific and that talks to the stakeholder in a way that they want to respond to, and that has a decent follow-up strategy so that we're not looking for the unicorns all the time. Not to mention the fact that obviously it's been, those strategies have been tested on literally thousands of people. So they have a much better opportunity of working because they have been proven to work consistently across industry, across language, across countries, across cultures, across everything else that you could think of. The important thing that I want you to take away from today's episode is that if you want to go and sell to big companies as a small service provider, do it. Absolutely. If you've got a hankering to work with big name brands, go for it. It's a lot of fun. Just make sure that you've got a proven process to generate the right leads in the first place, to troubleshoot your existing lead generation process if it's not currently working, and that you're open-minded enough to make changes to make sure that you can make it happen in the best way for you. And as always, like I say, the C-suite is there. If you haven't jumped in yet, the current pricing will be available until September the 1st, and then it will be going up. So hopefully we will see some of you in there joining us for September, where we'll have those September, October and November hot seats directly with me. You can ask me any questions about your lead generation process or any other part of your sales process as well. I'll see you in the next episode.